Hi everybody, welcome here to the Wine with Jimmy channel. Once again, another wine educational video, really designed to help those of you get more from the world of wine, be it if you are a student or you're just an avid enthusiast. So welcome to a series here for the diploma of the WSET looking at Catalunya. So it is series 1 of Catalunya, and we are talking about an introduction to this area, and then parts 2 and 3 will be focusing on Penedès, Catalunya, the DOs, and then part 3 on DO Costa del Segre. This video is free content, parts 2 and 3 available only on my e-learning portal over at www.winewithjimmy.com. If you have any comments or questions, I would love to hear from you. Please do pop them in the comments section below this video. Okay, let's rock and roll looking at Catalunya. So we're going to talk about the location, and then we'll go into some history before looking at climate and grape growing of this wonderful autonomous province. So there you are in terms of your location. So this autonomous province of Catalunya is located in the northeast of Spain, highlighted here in yellow and then blown up on the right hand side for good measure, incorporating there on the right all of the specific DOs. Its kind of eastern border is the Mediterranean coast, and this proximity to the sea, along with the altitude in areas inland, are the major influences on the climate here. So we have some topographical and climatic factors to talk into account. So similar to Somontano in Aragon and also Navarra nearby, Catalunya grows a significant proportion of international grape varieties. Of course, we are bordering France on the northern side here. Most of Aragon is on this side, and a little bit of Valencia is the border down here. But this northern border is the Pyrenees, and France is beyond that. So therefore, the locality, the proximity means there's an influence here, of course, from their neighbors to the north. This region has been at the forefront of changes and innovations in grape growing and winemaking in the last few decades. Barcelona, which is the Spanish second largest city behind Madrid and in front of Valencia, located here, is the significant local market for these wines, of course. So there's a lot that goes into Barcelona because of its proximity. So a little bit on the history of this wonderful region. Before I get stuck into the history, I'd just like to give you a couple of cultural snippets. So Catalunya is an interesting province. Of course, you will recently have heard that, of course, it has vied for its own independence away from Spain. There are certain nationalists within Catalonia who believe that they should be separated. And of course, that caused a lot of controversy. So there's quite a bit of a cultural focus here, which could be construed as being a bit different to the Spanish. And I think that's quite evident in a couple of Christmas cultural things to focus on. First of all, we have, both of these are actually centered around poop or poo. So in the nativity scene, you have someone called the El Cagana. And the Cagana is a man who is crouching down with his trousers down around his ankles, and he's taking a poop. Yes, a poop in the nativity scene. And secondly, there is something called the tiernedal, which is basically a large piñata, which is the shape of a log. It's actually called the pooping log. Typically, it's full of sweets and treats. And the children of Catalunya, if they are from a traditional family, they will be given one of these tiernedals, one of these pooping logs, on the 1st of December. And it is their task to look after this until Christmas Eve, when on Christmas Eve evening, they're allowed to hit it, like you would a piñata, and it opens up and it poops out all of these treats I kid you not, it's a wonderful little bit of culture within Catalonia. So anywhere that has a focus on toilet humor like that is actually a very favorite area of mine. Okay, let's talk about something which is less cultural, probably not, more historical. We're talking about the history of Catalonia to begin. So first of all, Iberians were the indigenous populations here. They were met by the traveling Phoenicians and Greeks, the Phoenicians coming from modern day, what we call today Lebanon, and the Greeks coming from the collection of Greek cities. Both of these rather large factions ended up traveling westward, and they brought grapevines and they initiated sea trade around this area. So both of those being mightily important from here all the way down to Andalusia, and really actually far into sort of Portugal's coastline as well. The Carthaginians established trade with these indigenous populations, and Carthage was establishing themselves here, but they were at odds with the Romans. And the Romans and the Carthaginians, of course, including the Punic Wars, a story for another day. We have, of course, a large amount of fighting between these two powerhouses. And Hispania actually became kind of like a default battleground between the Romans and the Carthaginians. They were both vying for expanding their territory, and eventually the Romans conquered around the 2nd century BC and continued vineyard cultivation. In Tarragona, which is a city which is southern of Barcelona on the coast, very important, and I'll talk about the Via Augusta on the next slide. Very important city. Here is a Roman amphitheatre right next to the coast. Okay, so what have the Romans ever done for us? So the Via Augusta is what is pictured. So this is the longest and busiest road on the Spanish mainland, of a distance of around 1,500 kilometers. That's about 930 miles. Superbly important for communications and transport of things like wheat, olive oil, wine, and precious metals. And of course, this connects to many of the important other roads. We have the Via de Plata, the Silver Road, that comes up here through Extremadura and Castilla y Leon. And of course, that connects to the Camino de Santiago. And of course, it's an infrastructure, a network of wonderful roads. Now, if you look at a lot of these key places, you'll see Taraco just here. Taraco, which is today Tarragona, was one of the most important cities situated along this road. And of course, there are many more important ones, but we are only focusing today on Catalunya. Pliny the Younger referred to the wines from Tarragona or Taraco as Tarraconensis wines, which were very highly regarded. So the Via Augusta was constructed in the 1st century BC and of course brought a fair bit of prosperity to Catalunya. Moving to the early and Middle Ages. Now, of course, the Western Roman Empire collapses, of course, famously towards the end of the 5th century AD. And we have an emergence of the Visigoths, which the Visigoths were very much sort of schooled in the Roman ways, a civilized tribe, I suppose would be called, but they became a very large faction who ruled initially in the south of France from Toulouse, then came through into Hispania, and started to eventually rule from Toledo in the middle of Castilla-La Mancha. But in fact, Barcelona did actually become a capital of the Visigothic kingdom after Toulouse and before Toledo. The Visigoths didn't last too long in the grand scheme of things. They shined after the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, but then came the onslaught of the Moors, moving through Hispania, and of course dominating from the south upwards from 711, and invaded Catalonia only in 718, so very quick indeed, and it became a part of Al-Andalus, but that was rather short-lived. The Franks, Christian Franks, pushed out the Moors in 801 from here. And under the Christian rulership, the Aragonese alliance was established, where King Ramiro II of Aragon, of course, lying towards the west of Catalunya, offered to marry daughter of Ramon Berenguer IV, in your picture there, who was the Count of Barcelona. If you have looked at my Aragon video, you'll know I talk a bit about this, about the Aragonese becoming actually very adept seamen and doing very well in the seas, of course, dominating places like Sicily and Sardinia in their expanse. Barcelona, though, with this, of course, prospered with this beneficial alliance with the Aragonese. So yes, very important time in the history. More Middle Ages for you. We have a number of different Christian factions emerging. We have Cistercians and Carthusians. Now, the Cistercian monks between the 12th and 14th century really sort of re-established the vineyards here. Viticulture expanded, and of course, it was needed for sacramental purposes. That became its first and foremost. But then, of course, the Reconquista troops who were fighting, of course, to take back this peninsula from the Moors. In this picture, by the way, is Santa Maria de Santas Cruz in Tarragona, which is one of our monasteries. Carthusians were around here in the 12th century. The Carthusian order of Provence looked for a home in Catalunya. Very sort of strict hermetic order, and lay monks tended vineyards and shared knowledge with the locals in the nearby villages, and in fact flourished really until the 17th century. The picture that comes to mind for me is the Cartoxia, the Ascaladei, today called the Scala Dei winery, situated at that monastery in Priorat. In the 15th century, the Count of Barcelona, the County of Barcelona, folded into the Aragonese crown. And then we have a number of significant, what might be called rebellions here. So given autonomy, this area under Ferdinand and Isabella, of course, the alliance starting at the end of the 15th century, but the autonomous status that they gained here in Catalonia, they placed themselves under the French king in 1640. Under the Bourbons, they rebelled again in the War of Spanish Succession and lost again. So difficult times, but that early sort of shaping of nationalism in Catalonia. Now, there was significant growth after this. So by the middle of the 18th century, viticulture was the primary source of income for Catalonia and large portion of region's economic growth. There were exports to areas like the Baltics, Scandinavia, and of course, Britain. There was a rise of nationalism here for Catalans, multiple movements in the 19th century, the rebirth of the nationalist movement itself, supporting of the Carlists. And we moved to wine around this time. So sparkling wine, of course, became a focus. In the 1860s, Joseph Raventós y Fatjo traveled to Champagne in the 1860s, and by 1872 was making his first sparkling wine via the Champagne method. It was not called Cava, of course, till a long time after, approximately 100 years. Catalans, going into the 20th century, first of all, phylloxera was something which actually entered Catalonia fairly early, and that caused problems. It was actually one of the earliest places in Spain, 1879, when phylloxera came through here. And they initially, the Catalans were, of course, feeding the French wine in those early years, but it became quickly decimated, of course. You can actually see some quite wonderful parts, like Pla de Bages, which is north of Barcelona, has these wonderful amounts of rolling hills. It's a lovely countryside that has these stone structures, which are wineries. which are tiny, but they're built by gravity in mind, right next to each vineyard. And you have hundreds of these stone huts, which really emerged because of the need to supply France with wine. But of course, then phylloxera, first recorded in Emporda, then started to, of course, move its way through Catalunya. And of course, that needed replantation by that point. But by 1972, the Catalans recognized 7 historic DOs, all listed here on the screen: Aiella, Conca de Barberà, Emporda, Penedès, Priorat, Tarragona, and Terra Alta. So those 7 DO were recognized, but of course they will be officially recognized by the Spanish government a bit later. There always is this disconnect between the Catalan government and the Spanish government, as one would expect. Okay, so let's talk about climatic conditions here in play in Catalunya. So Catalunya experiences, as one would expect, a Mediterranean climate with hot, dry summers, cool winters, and the coastal areas, so Tarragona, Sitges, Barcelona, and Emporda, will all experience fairly sort of humid conditions due to the proximity to the ocean. The coastal areas normally have sort of maximum temperatures at around sort of early 30 degrees Celsius, but the inland areas, which are more continental, can be maximum up to 40 degrees Celsius during the summer months. The inland, as mentioned just then, are much more continental focused, and the north is actually slightly cooler and with higher rainfall due to its proximity to the Pyrenees. But the rainiest months across most of the DOs are spring and autumn, but there are some summer rains in the northern areas. There's a topographical map for you. First of all, identifying if you have actually watched the Aragon video and Navarra, of course you will know that we start this map off with the Pyrenees that you see there. It's really half of it, the Pyrenees, is in Catalunya, and it's about 124 miles from the Mediterranean Sea to Aragon, so a very, very sizable amount of the Pyrenees. Then down in the southwest of the region, I have identified here on the map the Cordilleras Costero-Catalans, which run in 2 parallel ranges. So you have the one which is the closest to the sea, which is called the Cordillera Litoral, and then you've got the Pre-Litoral, which is inland. The closest to the sea, which is the one down here, where we got the writing Costero Catalan, that is the Litoral, and that has lower altitudes, about 760 meters that goes up to. The one that runs parallel to that, really where you've got the Cordilleras, this is the one where we find the highest elevations, up to about 1,700 meters. So about 1,700 meters for altitude in that area. And the Montserrat is the highest point of this. Then in the middle area, of course, you have the Central Depression. So this is about 200 to 600 meters. And this is where you've got all of the rivers that run through. So they drain down from most of them from the Pyrenees and head towards the Mediterranean, or they join other rivers like the Ebro River. And that's what we've got here. You'll see there are a number of rivers. You have the longest in Catalunya, which is the Ter River. That's this one that runs through here from the Pyrenees and then down Emporda area. You have the Llobregat River, which is the second longest. This runs really through the middle and down to Barcelona, just close to it. You have the one which is called the Siurana River. Now, I'm going to, it says it just there. You'll see it just there, S-I-U-R, and then A-N-A. And that runs through Priorat and also Montsant into the Ebro. And then you have the Ebro, which runs through here. So it enters from Aragon's southern section before exiting into the Mediterranean. So the Ter, Llobregat, Siurana, and the Ebro being the most significant rivers that we find in this area. In terms of soils and geology, now I'm going to focus really, I'm going to give you some generalizations here. And then we'll focus on one specific geology, which is the most important. Now, between the Cordillera Litoral and the Mediterranean Sea, which is this bottom area, so where we find most coastal settlements and lovely sandy beaches, we have alluvium soils, which have been, of course, moved and brought down by rivers. We have limestones here, clay, with some granitic and also slate. But then between the two mountain ranges, so the littoral and also the pre-littoral, so remember the littoral being the one which is slightly closer to the sea, the Mediterranean Sea, and then the backdrop of that is the pre-littoral at about sort of 2 to 3 times larger. In between this area, we find a lot of metamorphic rock based on igneous rock formations, which are slate and granitic. The most important of which is Licorella, which we see here in this picture. It's a rather dramatic soil that reminds one quite a bit of the slate soils that one sees in the Mosel. So this is a decomposed, very fragile slate and shale. It's a shallow topsoil with copper-coloured, typically copper-coloured, but you can find it kind of be anywhere from blue-grey all the way through to sort of reddish-coloured. And it's decomposed rocks of low organic content. It was formed some 416 to 318 million years ago during the Carboniferous and the Devonian periods. And we do find within these rocks a lot of mica and feldspar, which can give the kind of sparkle to this soil in the sunshine. Now, this certain type of rocks, as mentioned, this metamorphic rock based on granitic, igneous rock formations is found between those two parallel mountain ranges in the southwest. So we find it, therefore, in the DOQ of Priorat, and then the DO that surrounds Priorat, which is Montsant, and then north of that is a small area that borders it called the Conca de Barbera. So Priorat, Montsant, and the Conca de Barbera are 3 areas that actually have this soil. And those of you will know Priorat quite well. Maybe you know Montsant, but the Conca de Barbera is certainly an area that one should focus on a lot more, certainly for the exciting Trepat grape variety. Just a note on the certain DOs and DOQ here. So Catalunya has a total of 11 DOs and then 1 DOQ, which is the Catalan way of saying DOCA. And that, of course, is Priorat that you see in this label. We're going to go through all of the DOs in forthcoming videos and also the DOQ of Priorat. Catalunya also has its own scheme for exceptional wines from single estates, providing strict specifications are adhered to, including restrictions on yields and minimum length of time for the wine to be established in the market. These wines may be labelled as the Vida Franca, so Vida Franca. Here is a certain type, but you might see the Vida Finca. So here's a Finca El Puig that you'll see in this label. So the Vida Finca. Let me just scribble that down for you because I did miss say that just 1 second ago. Hold on. V Finca. Sorry, my pen has gone crazy. There you go. Finca. Okay, so let's have a look at one of these Google Earth 3D videos to put this into perspective. Here we look at the northeast region, autonomous region of Catalunya closer, and we're going to go to Spain's second largest city, that is Barcelona after Madrid. And there we are on the coast of Catalunya. And we'll focus on a very important landmark, that is the La Sagrada Familia, which was designed by Antoni Gaudí. It remains unfinished and is, of course, a really important focal point within Barcelona. There you are in all of its beauty. We will now focus on more things around viticulture, looking at the dramatic topography that dominates the north of the region, and that is the Pyrenees. So the Pyrenees is the large mountain range, of course, stretching from the Bay of Biscay all the way across to the Mediterranean. There you are. It's actually highlighted in purple just there. Now we're going to focus on the large DO Catalunya, created in 1999 with about 45,000 hectares. Has a broad array of grapes, no real identity, but big mixture of international and also local varieties. Nestled in there on the coast is Do Penedès, with about 18,000 hectares, a more modern, forward-thinking Do, Mediterranean in climate again here, with about 500 millimeters of rain and its 10 subzones. Okay, so there you go. Well, that brings the video, the first video on Catalunya to a conclusion. So that's just covering the introduction, the history, the climate, the grape growing. We're now going to go into the DOs, looking at Penedès and Catalunya in the next video, and then Costa da Segre in part 3. Series 2 will focus on Priorat. It's a bit more of a longer series, plus Montsant. If you do have any comments, questions, or concerns, please do get in touch. Once again, you can do so by commenting on this video below. If you want to watch part 2 and 3, you'll need to sign up to my e-learning portal over at www.winewithjimmy.com. Lots of very useful resources there, and of course, loads of exclusive video content. Well, I've been Jimmy Smith. Thank you so much. And if you do find yourself in the UK, come and say hi for a glass, or bottle. Ciao for now. Bye-bye.